your hypothalamus is, as I said, the cornerstone of your metabolism, your kind of physical structure. So your muscle mass, your bone mass, your fat storage. And your hypothalamus really takes signals from all parts of your body. I was mentioning some of them earlier, and it looks at what it thinks is homeostasis. So it wants to maintain a certain level of balance with fat storage versus, how much energy you're using or how much energy you need.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Human Enhancement Podcast. This is your host, Jeffrey Wu, and I'm really excited to talk with Dr. Jason McKeown, who's the CEO of Modius. I believe there's a corporate name, but Modius is a headset that stimulates the vestibular nerve and has interesting outcomes, including weight loss. So before diving into all of that, Jason is, a doctor and a neuroscientist and is doing, good research. I was just looking at some of your publications and the clinical trials that you're planning. Great to see that you guys aren't just making kind of, at first glance, kind of crazy claims like, hey, we're going to just zap parts of your brain, you're going to melt fat off. But looking at it rigorously. So appreciate the science-driven approach. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So tell me about your background. So I know you're a medically trained doctor, but also have interest in neuroscience. How did these two worlds come together to create the Modius device?
Well, my background, I should say, is in medicine. So I actually trained in medicine in Belfast in the north part of Ireland. And then I worked across the UK for some time, actually, just in various roles. But I was always really, really interested in kind of the neurology, the neuroscience side of it. And it was actually, I was working in neurosurgery at the time. Whenever we came up with this idea, looking at old neurotechnology. So you might have heard of things like deep brain implants or even implants that go into the chest and they stimulate the vagus nerve, which goes up to the brain stem. But that technology has been around for, like 30 plus years. It works really, really well. But it hasn't actually really been improved. So the old implant that went in, still the implants that go in now, and the issues are they're really invasive. You need surgery. So some of the implants, the deep brain ones, can actually do quite a bit of damage on the way in. So we were actually looking at all that technology and I suppose just seeing if we could make it better, improving it.
What was the endpoint for like the vagal nerve? Was it like reducing seizures, or what were the goals for vagal nerve implants or deep brain implants?
Yeah, so the most common one with deep brain would be for Parkinson's disease,
right?
And if you look up sort of deep brain implants in Parkinson's disease, like it's actually phenomenal. Just the changes that can happen like in seconds if you turn the device off. It looks like an entirely different person. You turn it back on again, and it just cures the symptoms.
Right, so the shaking. You stop the shaking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally amazing. The interesting thing of the vagus nerve stimulators, there's actually a really, really wide range. And initially, you probably think some of these things aren't related. So, for example, a vagus nerve stimulator for epilepsy, which reduces, really difficult to treat seizures, almost the same technology on the vagus nerve, but a slightly different waveform or frequency, has actually been approved for an obesity treatment. So that's been around for a few years in the US. But similarly, there are devices for like anxiety, depression. There are devices for migraine, and actually most recently there's a device for arthritis or kind of like chronic inflammatory disease. Now it's exactly the same nerve, but it's just the stimulation parameters change. So the trick is, in a way, finding the way into stimulating those deeper parts of your brain, which then actually influence the entire body, all these downstream effects. So yeah, the vagus nerve technology has been well established. It's phenomenal what it can do, but effectively it is just stimulating one nerve.
So you're trained so when you're studying medicine, practicing medicine, that was an area of fascination. And then what triggered the entrepreneurial light bulb to realize that, you could, combine the worlds of entrepreneurship and medicine to create a headset?
Yeah, well, I think actually that entrepreneurial streak was present before I'd even started medicine. So I used to build, computers and sell like kind of custom built PCs for people. Now that was I know that seems like pretty standard stuff now, but actually at that time when I was very young, I mean, I was maybe like 14 at the time. That wasn't commonplace. So I definitely remember back and have a really fond sort of recollection of working with technology, working with electronics. So I think whenever this came together, and as I say, I was working in neurosurgery at that time, and we realized that there are these electronic devices in such a cool area of medicine that potentially, we could start looking at these and look at ways to make them better.
Right.
And I suppose then what actually happened, our interest then was in this other nerve, the vestibular nerve. So the vagus nerve is deep down into the body, lots of applications. But we were actually looking at it's a cranial nerve. So a cranial nerve connects directly to your brainstem. There are only 10 that connect. There are 12 nerves, but there are only 10 that connect to the brainstem. And the one we were interested in is the vestibular nerve, and it actually goes towards the back of the head instead of going sort of down into the skull. So
it's
at
associated with your inner ear, right?
yeah. So that's the end point of that nerve is the inner ear, the vestibular system. But just behind the ear, and that kind of, you can almost feel the kind of hard bony part. It's so close to the surface there that you can actually turn that nerve on and off with just a little electrode pad and a very small, safe level of stimulation.
Right. Which is interesting. So mechanistically, why does zapping this nerve do anything? I mean, just from a high level.
Well, I suppose that nerves in the general sense, like any nerve, it is really just, their action potentials is, I suppose, the medical term, but that's really just a little electronic pulse that goes along, and the neurons, in a way, almost act like a wire. In the same way, if you plug an Ethernet cable in or an internet cable into your laptop, you can send signals right along, and as long as you know what you're sending, you can access remote computers and that you don't even see or you can't touch, and your brain to some degree is no different. So as long as we know what we are doing and you send in the correct signal to the right place, you can actually influence very deep and very important parts of the brain.
So essentially, a nerve is like an electrical wire that sends signal back and forth between the brainstem, in the case of the vestibular nerve, and with the inner ear components. And what you're proposing and executing on is that you can, hijack or manipulate that nerve with an external device in a way that is advantageous for certain outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is absolutely the case, and it's it's very, very, very similar to the vagus nerve stimulators. It is one nerve. It's not necessarily connected to, or you're not necessarily directly influencing the part of the brain that you're stimulating. But as long as you're sending the correct signal along, then you can do really, really amazing things. And the vestibular nerve is actually very, very similar to the vagus nerve.
Right.
So in theory, yeah, it's no different. You can do the same thing. The big advantage is, however, you don't need to go in below the skin or implant the device.
Yeah, which is interesting. So I've seen people talk about external vagal nerve stimulators. This is actually the first time I've heard about a vestibular nerve stimulator. But I think the whole space around electricity and brain stimulation is has tremendous interest. So one of my friends runs a company called Halo Neuroscience, which uses transcranial direct stimulation across the motor cortex to ostensibly improve athletic performance and muscle memory. I'm just curious your thoughts on the general space. Is there a reason why a lot of the interest is happening now? I mean, I have my own speculation around just a broader interest around biohacking, engineering human performance. But do you, from your perspective on the hardware side, from the stimulation side, I mean, what do you sense are the macro trends driving this interest from academia, industry, into consumer products?
Well, I think a big thing is actually just the change in, what like people being conscious about their health. So, even 10 years ago, people weren't just so active and always thinking about, improving themselves, making themselves better. And things like Apple Watch and Fitbit have come in and actually have really taken wearable technology to just mainstream. So, people don't think twice now about a device which, actively measures parts of their body and their nervous system. And it's just become, as I say, really, really mainstream. downstream.
Yeah, I'm
The
wearing a
next
smart ring right now that tracks my HRV, for example.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's not like unusual.
Right.
Whereas years ago it would have been like, what? That's kind of strange. Whereas I think just the natural progression of that is, we're moving from the passive wearable devices which track into this space where you have active wearables. We actually sort of call our own term careable. So it's beyond the wearable. It's actually actively doing something to the body. Now, I think the kind of natural progression there is it's going to be into the neural component of the body. So, it's no surprise that people are interested in using electricity across the cortex or the motor cortex or the peripheral nerves to actually influence, really key things in that neural space. And I think that is, using electricity to do that is the I suppose as I say natural, it maybe doesn't sound that natural to some people, but in a way, whenever you look at how the neurons fire and the brain works, that is the natural way to do it.
Yeah. So I think for, operating in a, generally related space of, I think both of our efforts are to improve human performance. People always ask me, and I'm sure people ask you, is it safe and does it work? So let's address those sequentially. So I think you were touching upon it. The brain is, essentially running on electricity, back and forth with action potentials, as you mentioned. Why is this
Yeah.
safe? I mean, have you done the safety studies? What is the safety track record? How is it regulated?
Yeah. So I'll take a little step back and just give a little bit more about the background. So whenever we then came up with this idea, I suppose we started looking at all the applications, and we actually started looking back at some really, really early data. I mean, there's actually data from about 50 years ago. It was all related to, believe it or not, NASA and the space race. So whenever you go into space, you actually lose an entire sensory input. Your vestibular sense turns off because there's no reference to gravity. So we started, I suppose, building
So,
on
I guess
all
so. The
that.
inner ear it governs balance, your positioning. So yeah, if you're in space or weightless, you have no sense of your balance anymore, I guess is.
Yeah, and I'll actually come into this probably later in
Yeah.
a little more detail. But actually, it's not just a sense of balance, and I think this is where we've assumed that it's less than it was for a long time. It is actually a marker of physical activity. So whenever you move, whenever you accelerate, you're constantly stimulating your vestibular sense. So it gives your brain, particularly your hypothalamus, it gives it a reference of how physically active you as a person are. And the reason it does that is because I'm sure you're aware of the term homeostasis. It's kind of the balance of things in the body. So we're interested in the metabolic balance, so like energy consumption versus energy storage. So homeostasis is actually altered by the hypothalamus, and it takes many readings. It takes the reading of your vagus sensory input from the body, things like leptin and ghrelin and insulin, and your parasympathetic and your sympathetic, all of that, and it makes, I suppose, it balances that homeostasis. But actually, one thing which I think we didn't realize for a long time was actually your vestibular input also balances that homeostasis. So if you're a very, say, athletic, physically active body, like for example a cheetah, running across the plains, always sort of hunting, moving, it's always fast acting. It's a massive evolutionary advantage for that animal to have a high bone density and lean muscle mass. Whereas compare that to, say, a bear that's hibernating in a cave, it is actually no physical activity at all. There's no vestibular input to the hypothalamus, and actually in that modality, the fat storage is the optimum metabolic balance.
Which gets me thinking. I mean, can you hack it by, if we take the thesis that the vestibular system is a signal for physical activity, can you just like shake your head a lot and just try to like not actually exercise, but just like trigger movement to just hijack that signal?
So I'll ask a question. Why do you rock a baby?
Yeah, it's for some reason it soothes the baby.
Yeah, so we know that rocking a baby actually helps it to sleep, and it settles it. We know that in elderly nursing homes that if you put in rocking chairs, it decreases anxiety, it decreases agitation and falls. And this is the reason why that is actually an effective way of hacking your own vestibular system.
Okay.
It's also why some particularly children who maybe have, say, ADHD or some learning difficulties, they tend to sort of rock back and forward. And again, that is them actually forcing their vestibular system to actually fire into the brainstem. So the answer is yes, you can hack it.
So basically we've been already doing it. Okay.
We already do it.
Yeah.
So we realized all of this sort of data. We actually realized that NASA had done these trials on mice, and they had increased vestibular stimulation.
Is that published? Is that searchable online?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's loads of this around,
what are the keywords like NASA vestibular stimulation?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm generating my own sort of academic site now with breakdowns of all these papers for the layperson. So if you want to check out my own personal, as I say, academic site, you'll be able to read all of these.
Okay.
So we presented this, I suppose, to the lab out in the University of California. And long story short, they actually invited me out to take a visiting scholar position there, and that's literally the role I have. It's just to do vestibular nerve stimulation and try and find what parts of the brain it improves, and can we get sort of applications for this. And they're actually really, really wide. I mean, from yes, we're really interested in weight loss and changing metabolism, but it goes right across to the mental health space. As I say, that's why people can rock back and forward. It actually creates a very positive effect on the sort of entire cortex. And previously, actually, they used to spin people around in a chair for things like depression and mania, because actually it settled it in a quite significant sense. But actually, then this spinning idea kind of went out of fashion whenever medications and antidepressants came around.
So I think to answer the original question, is it safe? So it sounds like part. No. I mean, but I think it does set the context well. Is that this is something that has been experimented with, and it's like kind of a natural phenomenon that people kind of intuit that rocking themselves, soothing themselves, it has some sort of soothing effect. So I guess the natural next question is, okay, one, people already are with their physical body, stimulating the vestibular system. Now the next step is, can we, using an external device, stimulating the nerve directly with electricity?
Yeah.
Is that safe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So parallel to this, actually, the technique of using electricity to stimulate the nerve has been known for a long time, but it just hasn't really made it past any sort of laboratory experiments. So we actually have a significant amount of safety data on specifically stimulating the nerve using electricity, and it's so much data, in fact, that we were able to really make the case that this doesn't have to strictly be regulated as a medical device. And we could go straight to the consumer device. Now, if we weren't able to show that were a safe device, there's no way would we be allowed to go into that consumer space. So it really created two parallel paths for us. One is that we want to have the device as an approved, prescribed device in future for not only weight loss, but actually we're interested in type 2 diabetes as well, and it's all due to vagus nerve stimulation. But then the other path is the consumer weight loss device. So if someone is wanting to try and improve or use a tool to make their weight loss journey easier, well, then that's why we've created the headset.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think that's an interesting just area that I think is going to get more clarity in the future with how regulators treat devices that have potential medical use, which is a very defined set of treatment, diagnosis, prevention of disease, like type 2 diabetes, for example, and then sort of health and wellness and an enhancement, which is you're healthy, can we improve yourself? So it sounds like you are working on both parallel tracks, which is what I think, me personally, just getting deeper and deeper into human performance. I mean, it's just two sides of the same coin ultimately. I mean, ostensibly, if you're healthier and more optimized, you're going to have less, prevent or, push out the onset of disease and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, the way I would look at it, and sometimes I think that people this idea of kind of wellness, it's slightly ill-defined, and some people don't really realize what we mean by that. But the example that I would often give is There are binary things in medicine. So, for example, if you fall and you break your leg, your leg was fine before and your leg is now broken. It's a very binary thing. There was no period in the middle where your leg was slowly beginning to get broken, and then at some point it crossed over into being a broken leg.
Right.
But actually, not a lot of medicine is like that. So obesity is an example, or I would often use mental health as well. So if you imagine so someone here is fine, but someone over here is in the obese state, there's actually been a transition period where they went right along, and in some of this there was no disease process as such. But then over here, at some point, this has become really a chronic disease, and it's the same with mental health. There's the space in the middle where your mood is low, or maybe you're more anxious, but you haven't really reached a chronic state. And then at some point, you're beyond it. Now, traditional medicine actually almost waits until you reach this state, and in my mind, that's too late. We should actually be treating this, pre-disease or the wellness space. So for us to have, say, a product in this kind of chronic disease, chronic obesity space, but also have a product which could potentially prevent people ever getting into that space. I mean, for us, that's just really, really exciting.
Yeah, and I really like the way you put it. I mean, I think for our listeners out there, if you actually look at how doctors diagnose type 2 diabetes, that's a personal area of interest, metabolic syndrome. I mean, it's basically, you kind of have these arbitrary number cutoffs of fasted blood sugar, blood glucose, or an arbitrary H1BAC number. And just like, once you cross, 5.7 H1BAC, or once you cross over 100 milligrams per deciliter or 125 milligrams per deciliter fasted blood sugar, now you're officially diabetic. But if you're under, you don't worry about it. Just, live your life happily. And it's just like, like medicine and I think health is not like the easy cases of medicine is you break an arm, like there's a discrete event. And I think actually humans are quite bad at judging continuous small incremental changes, right? It's like, oh, you're sliding and
absolutely.
We have set an arbitrary number, right? Like 100 milligrams per deciliter is like such an arbitrary number, like 5.7. Why is 5.7% H1BAC different from, why can't it be 5.2 or 5.9? And it's just like, I mean, I think there's some, epidemiological data around, okay, like that seems to be a cutoff where it gets dangerous. But I think if you actually look at the first principles, these are not, God-defined numbers, like you're officially, the arm is broken. It's so I think that's what I think it's all about. Can you prevent or just maintain in an optimal state longer?
Absolutely, no, I totally agree with that. And for us, we see two. If you're trying to broadly break it down, two challenges. It's preventing people who are well reaching a state of being unwell, or in our case, say obesity. It's preventing people who are maybe starting to gain some weight, preventing them actually ever getting into an obese state or a type 2 diabetic state. That is one challenge. And then the other challenge is for those people who are already there.
Reverse?
It's trying to, if not reverse it, it's trying to manage that and make that better and make life and wellness better for those people.
Right. So one point is that, okay, now assuming that, vestibular stimulation is, something that we just do as animals, just intuitively, when we can stimulate this safely, then the third question would be, well, how do you know, the waveforms, the signals of electricity, to actually do the right thing? I can imagine that you send the wrong signal, you do, overly high, voltage or amps, you might do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So how do we understand exactly types of waveforms and energy levels to actually send?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's something actually we've put a lot of work into, and again, it's something that we've really taken into this role of, if we're going to go down a consumer path, we really need to know that we are doing, this is a safe device that people can use it and they're not going to get side effects. So some of the actual work previously that have been done was on what levels of stimulation actually create the greatest response, and there's some really interesting things here. The changes between say a high frequency and a low frequency are actually quite pronounced. And it's actually whenever you come down into the low frequency range that you start to see spikes in sympathetic muscle activity. So even though you're stimulating your vestibular nerve, you can actually see the sympathetic muscle activity increase in as far as your calf muscles. So actually those tests weren't done by us, and so basically low frequency gives the highest kind of metabolic change or certainly sympathetic change, and then also it has to be a distinct frequency that is not actually in sync with your own cardiac rhythm, because believe it or not, even the small little change of your heartbeat, that small little electrical pulse is enough to kind of knock that off the peak.
What are the hertz when you say low? What is high?
So 0.5 is actually the device, the Modius device, what we use, and then actually we're looking at other areas which would be considerably higher than that.
Okay.
I mean, some of the vagus nerve stimulators are up to I think some of them are 15,000 hertz or something. So
this is a slow pulse. This is once every 2 seconds. If 0.5 hertz.
And you feel it. I mean, it's
boom.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And because we actually we've designed it to kind of switch polarity and move around. It's just so you don't accommodate to it. So you actually feel it, and whenever you turn the device on, you can increase the power level. And we set a max power level for the consumer device. The medical device actually is a bit higher, but the consumer device, whenever you reach the threshold where it's activating the vestibular nuclei in your brainstem, you actually feel like you're moving. Your brain can't tell the difference between a natural signal and the signal that we overlay.
That's interesting. It's mimicking moving every 2 seconds is what we're suggesting.
It's actually quite. It's nice, It's like lying on a lilo in a swimming pool. It feels like you're sort of floating, kind of rocking back and forward. And we find most people wear this last thing at night because it makes them very relaxed. There's a thing called the soporific effect. It's actually part of vestibular stimulation, and that actually induces sleep. So we find that most people wear this just before they go to bed because it vastly improves their sleep, which is technically a side effect of what we're doing, but it's obviously a very positive side effect.
And then what does the pulse waveform look like? Are these just every 2 seconds we're doing 0.5 hertz, just zero max drop, or is it a sinusoidal waveform? What kind of pulses are you sending through, or is that part of the?
We're actually looking across a various kind of range of pulses, but not dissimilar to what you're describing there. But I don't want, just for commercial reasons, I wouldn't want to go into just the specific details.
Okay.
But yeah,
so that's part of the secret sauce is that there is some.
That is important actually.
Okay. So it's not as easy as signal on, signal off. There is some art to the signal waveform.
There is the waveform itself we've sort of custom generated, and I mean it's similar with the vagus nerve stimulators. There's lots of range of waveform, but you really want to optimize it. I'm sure various waveforms would get various effects, but as I say, our goal with this device certainly is to optimize the metabolic output, or the sort of autonomic output, to actually try and really make it easier for people to lose weight.
Okay. Efficacy. So the main endpoint for this particular device is weight loss, which is one of the most desired attributes in just broad consumer health and wellness. So it sounds like if it works, it's something that's really compelling for a number of folks. So going from stimulation and then mimicking movement, how does that get to weight loss?
Yeah, so it's to do with actually the nuclei in the brainstem and then the hypothalamus that are actually influenced. So your hypothalamus is actually the cornerstone of your metabolism, your kind of physical structure. So your muscle mass, your bone mass, your fat storage. And your hypothalamus really takes signals from all parts of your body. I was mentioning some of them earlier, and it looks at what it thinks is homeostasis. So it wants to maintain a certain level of balance with fat storage versus how much energy you're using or how much energy you need. Now, there's a range that your body sits inside, and typically it sort of fluctuates a little, maybe a few pounds, and you don't think too much about it. So some weeks you'll be a pound or two heavier, some weeks you'll be a pound or two lighter, but roughly speaking, you stay at a fairly constant level. The problem is if your body actually gains too much fat. So say it's a period where we've maybe been too sedentary, or we have overeating for a while. or things like medication or comorbidities like diabetes or thyroid problems. So if that weight actually creeps up, unfortunately the range, that sort of happy range that your hypothalamus keeps you in, it also will creep up. So whenever you then start to try and reduce that body fat again, your hypothalamus thinks that you're outside the natural range.
So you're talking about a set point, like your natural weight set point creeps up as you slowly gain weight or slow down your physical exercise.
Yeah, we call it the set point, but it's more of a range that, it's not like a sort of really rigid. There's quite a gap. So actually what happens is within that gap, people tend to lose a few pounds and they go then towards the lower end of the range and they'll hit a bit of a plateau. And that plateau is their hypothalamus stopping any further weight loss. And it'll do that by just making your desire to eat be, insatiable. You'll never feel full. Your metabolic rate can slow right down. Even your core temperature can go down just to try and preserve fat storage. Now, if you maintain that, like if you can stay at that and keep your calories or your food down, eventually you will lose weight, and that's what happens. But most people actually just can't get beyond that plateau.
They give up. They give up, right? I mean, it's like you're fighting against a set point, but you need to create a new set point. It takes your body needs to adapt to a new set point.
Yeah, and that is exceptionally difficult. And actually, sometimes I get quite frustrated because a lot of people would come back to us and say, we're just giving people an excuse not to try. But that is complete nonsense. I mean, people try really, really hard, and it is just too much. And even if you do eventually sort of get down, if everything internally hasn't kind of readjusted, then you're fighting against that for such a long time that you have one bad weekend and loads of weight piles back on, and people just get so disheartened that they give up.
Right.
So what we are doing is we're trying to influence that part. So that plateau, we know what happens. We know what parts of the hypothalamus actually influence that. But we also know that the vestibular nerve goes in through the brainstem and actually projects up into various areas of the hypothalamus. And if you're to split it down, and there are key areas, the vestibular system actually connects into those key areas. So what we are doing is just repeatedly stimulating the vestibular nuclei in the brainstem, which sends the signal into the hypothalamus, so that whenever people start to decrease the weight, that actually that plateau, hopefully it is if it were totally gone, would be fantastic, but realistically it's just making it easier for people actually to get down further than they have gotten before.
Yeah. I mean, I can see how a mimic of physical movement through the vestibular nerve can be a contributor to that, right? I mean, I think it would be an overly stretch to say, you can totally mimic the benefits of physical movement and exercise, right? Like, I don't think you're claiming that, but it's like we are assisting, your brain and mimicking some of the effects of, of resetting your hypothalamus.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the crucial part of this. It's not to I suppose mimic the actual force of physical activity. So it's not like firing your muscles over and over again. It's actually just letting your brain know that this is a physically active body. It is storing too much fat, so allow fat stores to go down. So whereas if that's not happening, then your hypothalamus is always trying to keep fat stores higher. But we're trying to overlay the signal of, yes, fat stores can go down.
Right. Yeah, I'm just wondering because I mean, the human physiology is a very complex system. So I'm just curious, what would be other downstream effects, if you're sort of not actually doing physical exertion necessarily, but you're tricking, or mimicking some effect of physical exertion in a certain part of your brain. I'm just wondering, would that put, it would be in fairly novel physiological state, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just, I'm sure that, I presume it's part of what the continued research is, to just understand the full cascading effects of something like this could entail.
Yeah, well, our interest is really what happens in what we would call the entire autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic to one side, you're kind of rest and digest, and then your sympathetic, your fight or flight. And actually, those two are, a lot of people think they're a bit like a seesaw, and they kind of, as one goes up, one goes down. That is true, but the entire balance itself can also shift. And that is ultimately what we are trying to I suppose modify, but in a positive way. So you actually do see downstream effects in many things which you would expect. So for example, if I said, yeah, this influences the part of the brain which controls, say, how much sort of fat you store in a physique way, so promotes kind of a more muscular athletic physique. So you would expect to see changes in the HPA axis. You would expect to see changes in thyroid, and you'd also potentially see positive changes in someone, say, who's type 2 diabetic. So things like, your insulin sensitivity.
Insulin sensitivity. Interesting.
Yep. Or your sort of baseline glucose levels. No, sorry, and just a disclaimer there, that is about vestibular stimulation in general. So just the field of vestibular stimulation in general.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying our device is indicated for that. So Modius is just indicated for weight loss, but the research, the academic research that I do in this field, we've actually seen all of those downstream changes. And the other thing, which is actually really well known, is, and this is a bit of a test for us, because if what we're saying is true, the entire umbrella of metabolism should change. It shouldn't just be that you lose kind of non-specific weight. If anything, you should actually see an increase in muscle mass and in bone density. And actually, all the animal work shows that. And if anything, there's probably been more work done on the bone density side of things than the work that actually we've done. So for years, it's been known that the vestibular system inputs very specifically, and it's through the sympathetic nervous system, to bone regulation. So if you can modify bone metabolism basically by cutting the vestibular nerve.
Very cool.
And collectively, that whole thing is what's influenced, that whole autonomic control, all those downstream effects. And as I say, if that weren't the case, then you might just see non-specific weight loss, which actually is if anything, that's a quick test that you can do to see that we're changing metabolism, not just kind of making people kind of not eat as much food and then they lose sort of weight in general.
Right. Which, I mean, even reducing ghrelin through stimulation could be interesting, but if it is what you're saying, which is a whole cascading effect across all of metabolism, I mean, that's something that is interesting. I mean, I want to talk about that, but before talking about that, so what is the human data for weight loss? I mean, I presume you have case studies. Do you have a published RCT on this? So what is the human data backing the weight loss?
Yeah, we really, I suppose our initial thing was the sort of what we call pilot studies. So pretty low numbers. I think it's around 30 or so people actually in the lab, which we used. I mean, we sort of split them up into three. So one group we did DEXA scans looking at fat mass. The other group we did fat oxidation. So you put the mask on, you can measure the CO2. And then the other group we looked at just saliva levels of insulin.
And it's lower. I believe that CO2 ratio means more fat, more adapted to fat metabolism. It's some ratio. It's either, but I know what you're talking about. I mean, there's basically by the ratio of CO2 output, you can tell whether your body is burning more sugar or more fat. But okay.
And then the other part of that is saliva, insulin, and leptin, and just general sort of subjective score.
Okay, so you have three cohorts out of sort of n equals 10 for each cohort. Yeah, and you're doing placebo-backed or crossover? Treatment?
So no, they were two of those groups, they were their own controls. So we would repeat the experiment with a sham device, and then for the weight loss group, actually we split into just a sham group, a small sham group, and then an active group.
Okay, so some of the arms were crossover. Yeah. So they were their own control, and then some were, you actually had two parallel cohorts. One was they were wearing a device, I guess, but nothing was going on. No
delivery. Yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah, I know. I mean, the point of, I suppose, pilot study. So I suppose the typical medical device company, you do the theory, you do the pilot studies, then you do the big long sort of FDA trials.
Phase 1, 2, phase 3, yeah.
Yeah, the purpose of the pilot study is really just to see is it worth proceeding into the larger studies. We actually did see changes across all of those, so positive changes. I mean, even a modest dose, it was like 3 times a week, we were able to see reduction, particularly central fat in that group, albeit a pretty small group. But central fat what primarily was reducing. Also, increasing fat oxidation or fat metabolism, and saliva, insulin, and leptin. Actually, we're able to see both changes in those at a fasting kind of pre-breakfast state. And then at that time, actually, the device also give you a slight decrease in appetite. So these guys were pretty hungry, pre-breakfast, but as hunger kind of increased, that with headset on, actually it sort of plateaued, and then you take the headset off and starts to increase again.
Is this peer reviewed and published, or is it posted on your website as a white paper?
Yeah, we just on a white paper on that, but okay. As I say, that the real purpose of that was to step into sort of full trials, which is where it's quite interesting now. So over the next year, we'll probably have about 300 or so people through trials, and that is a year long wearing the device, double blind, randomized control. Half of the group have just sham headsets. That's a multi-center trial, so we have a site in California. We also have a site in the UK. And also, this is quite interesting. We're actually setting up a pediatric trial in middle America as well. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, 300 people over a year is not cheap. I mean, that's something that we ourselves understand the cost associated with that. Are you self-funding? Do you have research grants from foundations, NIH?
Yeah, we do both actually to some degree. So we do have funding in place from the company, and I'll talk about actually how we got that. And then also, we're looking at sort of research grants. The areas of weight loss and type 2 diabetes, it's a really important area. So there are, I suppose, some facilities available for that. But the idea there is to have this as an approved weight loss device. Primarily in adults in the US that you can get on your insurance or your doctor would prescribe for you, and then we'd be looking maybe towards some sort of preventative, maybe pediatric type device, and then further to that we would be expanding into the area of type 2 diabetes, because not only is there the sort of indirect effect where you lose weight, your diabetes will improve, but there's actually a direct effect, because particularly in the pre-diabetes state, because you have that kind of autonomic dysfunction, and it's because your vagus nerve has gone down into, say, your pancreas. Actually, you can get a direct neurological influence by stimulating the brainstem to actually influence what the vagus nerve does, and you can potentially increase, like for example, insulin sensitivity, or improve insulin output from a pancreas which isn't performing.
Right. I mean, which is interesting, right? If you're saying that you're seeing ambient insulin levels reduce off of a pretty short treatment period.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting for metabolic syndrome. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, the field is really, really interesting, and I suppose that is one very well defined sort of medical area. But then also what we realized was actually the FDA have a category called sort of the wellness category, and because we are actually a non-invasive device, we were able to say this is a very low risk device. Right. Here's all these previous papers that I talked about showing this, and also rather than saying that we want to treat obesity, we really just want this to be an aid, for people to actually lose weight. So if people are trying to lose weight, that this can help them, or can be a tool. So actually that is Modius. So all that other stuff I talked about, that's very much a medical, very distinct device which we haven't released yet. But Modius is the weight loss or weight management device that a consumer can buy.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand the importance there. Not talking anything about medical advice, medical treatment. This is all, we're talking about the science and the research active going on there, but in terms of the commercial product, this is consumer, so generally regarded as safe type intervention.
It's in the wellness category. It can be purchased right by consumer, and I say just our team. Whenever we realized this, I mean, one thing that we were really sort of open and honest about was that yes, I mean, in the lab and the theory, it's all pretty good, but it's still a pilot study at the end of the day, and it's a relatively modest size. What actually happens when you open the device up to the consumer market? What people who have comorbidities, people who are on medication, people who have stressful lives, and there's just so many influences on weight. What actually happens? So we went onto a platform called Indiegogo. It's a bit like kind of Kickstarter,
crowdfunding, or pre-sales,
on that, to say, look, we want guys to feed back to us. We'll give you the device, really discounted price, but for period of 90 days, feedback to us. And at the end of 90 days, if you're not happy, we will 100% give your money back. It is, there's no questions asked. We're not trying to catch people out. Literally, they don't even have to give us a reason. If they give us the device back, we'll give them their money back, because we just want to know how this performs. So we actually set our target at $50,000 on Indiegogo, and I think we had hit $50,000 in like 4 hours, and within a week we had hit over $1 million. So we actually had to then almost try to slow it down a little, but that still increased, and we actually ended up raising over $2 million.
Wow.
But and that's fantastic, and that's where some of the funding for the trials obviously has come from. But a really important thing from that is that we have data from that group now. So that group are actually starting to come through, and we were able to deliver pretty quickly. And we're now getting the group who have passed that kind of 3-month point and are into sort of 3, 4, 5 months. So we're getting some really, really great data from around, like, I think it's like 4,000 people or something was probably feeding back to us.
So I gotta ask, like, how often do you wear it, the Modius?
My own journey was quite interesting. I documented my own journey. I've lost about 19 pounds, and at the same time I gained about maybe 4 or 5 pounds of muscle.
Yeah.
So I actually would have worn it like every day, like religiously at night.
What was the time span for that kind of outcome?
A year, pretty much exactly a year. I had full body scans because I thought pod scans.
Okay.
So I had, in the UK, it's a little more difficult to get a DEXA scan because of the radiation. So I went to a local university, got pod scans.
Which is water displacement?
Say that again, sorry?
Is that water displacement?
It's the same principle, but it's in an airtight container, so they actually just displace the air.
Okay.
But it's basically the same principle.
Yeah. Cool.
And yes, so I had really positive effects. I'm actually now using our second device, which is in the mental health space. And it's like, I mean, my mental health is fine, thankfully, but it's just because I really love the idea of I wouldn't ever tell someone that you should try this without me having tried it for a long time. So quite excited about that as well.
Very cool. I mean, one of the interesting things from, our community is that we're, a lot of our listeners are interested in intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets. And it sounds like there's an interesting crossover with some of the endpoints that you're seeing with reduced insulin. Obviously, one of the reasons, multitude of reasons why one would intermittent fast, eat keto, but is to treat, prevent type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So I'm personally interested in how, fasting, exogenous ketones, ketone esters, something that, we're bringing to market, how these things all stack together. Because I think I'm actually just curious to run an experiment, if you just wear your Modius and you wear a continuous glucose monitor, do you just see, your blood sugar drop, or, do you finger pricks to test ketone levels? Do you see ketone levels potentially go up as your glucose drops? I think there's a multitude of the things to look at it's like a cool intervention.
Well, anecdotally now, this is just some feedback that we've had from our community members, but we've had a significant amount of people coming back to us, type 2 diabetics, saying that they've been able to adjust their medication in a pretty short period of time. Particularly those who take insulin, actually, they've been able to decrease the dose. And then we have other reports just of more stable, a lower but more stable baseline. So even if they have, say, a bad weekend, their blood sugars aren't like going crazy like they used to. I think all this fits in very, very well. And again, I think it's because it's that top level, that autonomic control. So if rather than adjusting something sort of lower down the chain of command, if you actually go up and influence the hypothalamus or the top level, then actually that's where you see the real benefit. Very cool.
And I know that we have a special offer for our listeners, right? So do you want to explain it to our listeners?
If anyone's interested in the Modius device, they can buy directly from modiushealth.com. But we're offering your listeners a promo code, and I'm not sure, do you put it up on the screen or?
Yeah, we'll put it up on the screen, but it'll be HVMN human as a promo code for a 10% off on the order.
Yep. So basically, yeah, put in a promo code, you get your 10% off. We actually include the whole pack comes with three months worth of pads and little sort of wipes just to take some of the oil off the skin. And also, although we're technically a sort of UK-based company, we do free shipping to the US, and it's pretty quick turnaround. It's usually I think actually some guys have had it next day delivered to the US, but it's usually like sort of two to 3 days, so it's pretty quick. But definitely put the promo code in and get the discount.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like a very cool intervention that's, that's thoughtful and rigorous behind the science and evidence behind it. So appreciate the good work here. And I think it's a fascinating just broad space. I think just, from, this conversation here in my conversations with other, operators, scientists, researchers, there just seems to be, I don't know if it's like an ideological, discussion or debate or a cultural debate, but there's just always a skepticism or this kind of I don't believe you type critique, but which I think is fine. I think we should all be skeptical coming in. But if we're doing the actual studies, producing actual data, doing the actual science, and it's safe, and we have good signal that this is actually efficacious, it's a worthwhile goal to pursue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that whenever I started, I probably didn't realize just how important this was. But the risk profile in that has to be, number one, actually for us. So we would highlight again that this is a really, really safe, it's a really, really low risk device. And the reason that we say that is actually we just know with weight loss, it's such a difficult sort of multi-factored issue that we know for a fact, and we're really open and honest about this, that the device will not help everyone. So we don't want people going in thinking that they're doing something risky and that it might not work out. I mean, that is absolutely not the case. It's very, very low risk, and thankfully we're actually seeing about 80% of people who are regularly using the device actually achieve a significant amount of weight loss. So that is fantastic. And as I said at the start, if people feel that it just hasn't helped, it's not that we're wanting to try and keep their money. We will happily give them their money back, even if it has helped. If they've lost loads of weight and they still want the device back, it is not about that. It is about us, really trying to make a big impact here. And for those people that it works, causing a significant amount of weight loss, and ultimately just trying to make this problem easier for a lot of people.
Well said. Thanks for taking the time and sharing about your work in research and talking about Modius. Appreciate the time. Cheers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. That was a fun conversation with Jason. Exciting research and work that they're doing over at Modius Health. So as always, we always try to hook up our listeners, and we hooked up an awesome promotion. So modiushealth.com, check out their headsets, and if that's something that's interesting to you, get 10% off if you use the promo code HUMAN, HVMN. So promo code HVMN, 10% off at modiushealth.com. Check it out. It's something that I'll be personally probably experimenting with it. I think it sounds intriguing to me personally. And then as always, appreciate the feedback and really just the loyalty and support that you guys show us. We've opened up an email hotline for all you podcast listeners, podcast@hvmn.com. Both Zil, our producer, and I read every single one of those emails. And we had a nice flood of responses over the last week. So to give you a reminder on what that is, just give us a review on iTunes, take a screenshot of it, and send it over to podcast@human.com, and we'll hook you up with a free Sprint mini bottle. Sprint is our acute nootropic that helps you get into a flow state. But regardless of the review or the free Sprint Mini, Zil just enjoys your feedbacks and comments. It helps us improve the program, get the right content, and it keeps us motivated to do a good job on this program. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, and talk to you soon.